Hello and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's Cablecast Post Agenda for Wednesday, October 25th, 2023, relative to the discussion on Bills 2023 and 1866, 2023, 1867, the corporate ownership of real estate. My name is Deborah Gross. I am the member from District 7 and I chair Intergovernmental and Educational Affairs. Will the clerk please read the title of the bills?
Bill 1866, Ordinance Amending Title VI, Conduct, Article 5, Discrimination, Chapter 659, Unlawful Practices, Section 659.03, Unlawful Housing Practices in order to provide protections to homeowners from solicitation and related problems, all under certain terms and conditions. Bill 1867, Ordinance Amending Title VI, Conduct, Article 1, Regulated Rights and Actions by adding new chapter entitled Residential Property Wholesalers to regulate the solicitation of purchases of real estate and require certain disclosures of property purchasers to homeowners.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. For the record, we are joined today by Councilmember Coghill, and we may have other members joining us or coming in and out. So we're joined today at the table by several guests who have studied this issue of corporate takeover of our housing stock at the local level and at the national level. And also we have the executive director of our Fair Housing Partnership. So I'm going to ask our guests, I'll read off the names. We are joined by Chris Rosselot, who is the Director of Policy for the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group, who've issued a report on the local dynamics in Pittsburgh. Also online by Ben Price, who is a researcher at Drexel University, who I may have more of a title than that, Professor Price, but I don't have it in front of me, I apologize, who has studied the corporate takeover of housing at the national level, and also by Dave Brangen, who's the executive director of Lawrenceville United, which is one of the neighborhoods that I represent, which I can call, I think in this case, a canary in a coal mine on this issue. We've been struggling with it for many years. So with that, what we'll do is we'll give each of our guests about 10 minutes or so to present, and we'll reserve time at the end for interrogatory with members as they come in and out. So I'd like to start today with Mr. Rosselot. Do you have any slides for us that we need to know about, or just have our presentation?
I do. I have an abbreviated statement that I'll read. I submitted one earlier, a longer one for the record, and then I'll turn it over for Drew.
Oh, I apologize. Thank you. Got it there. Are you all set, Drew, with the presentation?
Yeah, I am. Should I share the slides now, or?
I'm just gonna ask our IT if they're sharing screen so that we can get the presentations up online. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, please continue.
Great. Good afternoon, Councilwoman Gross, Councilman Coghill, and other members of council tuning in online. My name is Chris Rosselot, Policy Director at Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Research Analyst Drew Bott. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss our recent report on corporate housing purchases in the city of Pittsburgh. In August of this year, PCRG released its corporate housing study, which delves into the escalating trend of housing sales to corporate entities and real estate investors in major U.S. Metro areas over the past decade. It found that from 2010 to 2021, the share of houses sold to corporate entities in the city of Pittsburgh increased over the last decade, and that these buyers paid a fraction of the price of regular home buyers. In that time, corporate sales also doubled in other communities throughout Allegheny County. The basis of our report was to highlight trends of these purchases and the impact of these purchases on communities, to provide a resource tool for our neighborhoods we represent, and policy recommendations to regulate these purchases. Community leaders and neighborhood advocates have said corporate purchases are disrupting the stability of their neighborhoods, as these buyers often prioritize profit over the well-being of its residents. Unfortunately, as we have seen in Pittsburgh, these purchases can also lead to displacement of longtime homeowners. Moreover, regulating corporate home purchases can help promote economic equity by ensuring that housing is not solely a speculative investment for the wealthy, but a place for people to live, lay roots in the community, and build their lives. The research conclusions from this study reiterate what we all have believed for a long time, that it is the corporate purchasing of homes that also negatively impacts the real estate market in these neighborhoods, which can drive up home prices, that it makes it more difficult for individual buyers to compete with corporate interests. Additionally, this market distortion can inflate the housing prices and reduce the number of housing options available for low-income buyers. Compounding these adverse impacts to neighborhood conditions is that corporate buyers lack transparency and accountability to the public. The policy proposals that we are discussing today would address transparency concerns and ensure access to the public so we understand who owns properties in their neighborhood and for what purpose. We need to advocate for regulations at all levels of government that promote fair housing practices and prevent discrimination, which I believe Councilwoman Gross's legislation attempts to do. Quite simply, corporate and LLC purchasers should be held to the same standards as individual buyers. Thank you, Council, again for this opportunity, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Druda, for a presentation.
So the study was conducted by previous research analyst at PCRG, John Boyle. And the reason the study was conducted was to add some quantitative evidence to the neighborhood stories of increasing corporate purchases. The study analyzes property sales in Allegheny County from 2010 to 2021. We have only included sales of 1 to 4 unit residential houses like duplexes, condos, and townhouses in the study. So all the findings and trends are pertaining to the 1 to 4 unit residential housing sales. Here are the 3 main findings of the study. The first one, as Chris mentioned, is that the study confirms a rise in corporate sales in the city of Pittsburgh. So in the city of Pittsburgh in the last decade, corporate sales have increased from 15.5% to 24.8% of total sales, which is a 10 percentage point straight increase. And the other point to be noted is that this rise is not equal everywhere. There is a disproportionate increase in corporate sales in city neighborhoods that are historically black and or low and moderate income communities. The third key finding that also Chris alluded to is that corporates pay lower than the average price. So if I have to break down the statistic on the screen, in the city of Pittsburgh in the past 10 years, if the average sale price was $100, then corporates have paid on average only $70. So that's another interesting finding from the study. As we go deeper into the study, it looks at predatory investment practices and how certain neighborhoods and census tracts in the city are more vulnerable than others towards these practices. Here is just a definition to start with. Predatory investment practices are those that coerce the seller into an unfavorable deal. Investors may take advantage of the owner's financial and legal status and pay a price that is much lesser than the property's worth. So PCRG has identified several indicators or markers that can point to the fact that a certain area is vulnerable to these predatory investment practices. Here are the 7 market flags that are listed by PCRG. Something to be noted here is that presence of a single factor in isolation might not say much, but if more of these markers are present, then it definitely says that an area is vulnerable. So the markers are low income in an area, low volume of total sales, low average sale price, low corporate sale price to average sale price ratio, high volume of corporate sales, high corporate to total sale ratio, and low market activity. So for this presentation, I have pulled out 2 census tracts from Pittsburgh neighborhoods that are vulnerable. So here is one census tract from the Lincoln-Leamington neighborhood, and 5 of the 7 housing market flags are observed in this neighborhood. as are seen here. I'll give a moment for people to read. The other tract, as an example here, is a vulnerable tract in a neighborhood of Sheridan, and 4 out of the 7 housing market flags are present, which makes this neighborhood also vulnerable to predatory investment practices. And here are the markers: low income, high corporate sales, high corporate to total sale ratio, and low average sale price. These are examples of other neighborhoods where vulnerable tracts are present: Homewood, Arlington, Mount Oliver, Larimer, Knoxville, East Liberty. These are just some examples. I would like to hand it over to Chris for the policy focus.
Yeah, so the study and report recommends policies at all levels, local, federal, state, including legislation that we're going to talk about today, but also at the federal level, the Stop Predatory Investment Act, sponsored, introduced by Senator Brown of Ohio, which cuts corporate tax loopholes for these investors, which I believe Senator Fetterman of Pennsylvania signed on to as well. We also looked at other models in cities that are trying to compete with these corporate interests, because often these corporate interests come with cash. They can buy quickly. So we're seeing other models in other cities that are providing funding, whether it's through partnerships with local government and financial institutions to help first-time home buyers compete with these corporate interests. So that's our presentation.
Thank you. Just getting my microphone back here. Appreciate it. Next, we're going to hear from Professor Price from Drexel University. Are you on our screen? There you are. Thank you. Appreciate it. And also, we'll make sure that for our IMP that we get that screen shared too when the presentation gets up. Mr. Price, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit for us, since I didn't have much bio in front of me when I did my introductions?
Sure, no worries. Thanks so much for having me, Councilman Gross, and for holding this post-agenda. I'm a research fellow at the NOAC Macro Finance Lab at Drexel University, and also born and raised Pittsburgher. So happy to be back in the city, even if it's virtually, and talking about this important issue. Over the past year or so, I've conducted a number of studies on investor purchases in the housing market and the way that corporations have changed the rental housing market as part of this overall work at the NOAC Microfinance Lab. And let me say a little bit about words of the lab, since I imagine that most people haven't heard about us. We're within the Lindy Institute of Urban Innovation at Drexel University, and we were founded in 2018 by Bruce Katz and Jeremy Noack, with our work focusing broadly on inclusive economic development, with working with local governments, nonprofits, and civic associations. Over the past year, as I said, we've produced a number of reports and newsletters on the future of housing policy, written in collaboration with our national partners, Accelerator for America, and a local partner of the Reinvestment Fund, who I know has also done work in the city of Pittsburgh. And today I'll be talking about our findings from the first 2 reports in our series. Our first report, which was co-authored with the Reinvestment Fund, focused on investor purchases in Philadelphia, Jacksonville, and Richmond. And for the purposes of this report, we defined an investor as any entity who either had a keyword in their name indicating that they were a corporation or been part of more than 5 transactions during this time period. We looked at the trajectory of all homes sold in these cities in 2020 and 2021, say from an owner-occupant to another owner-occupant, an owner-occupant to an investor, and so on. Unlike the PCRG report in Pittsburgh, we found that investor purchases represented a significant share of all homes purchased in these cities during the time period, ranging from 19 to 25% of all homes sold. These purchases were focused within census tracts that were lower priced than other neighborhoods, with higher vacancy rates and with higher shares of people of color. And we trace this activity to new technologies, new landlords, and new market forces that have made the single-family residential market an attractive investment area. In Jacksonville, we found the elevated rates of investor purchases were associated with decreasing homeownership rates and decreasing number of homeowners. We find this rise of investor purchases troubling for homeowners, home buyers, and tenants. To drill a little deeper into the findings from this first report, we utilized the reinvestment fund's market value analysis to look at the relationship between sale trajectories and market types. The MVA, I know, has been conducted for the city of Pittsburgh, but it's a proprietary analysis developed by the reinvestment fund to categorize different census block groups by housing market strength, with A markets being the strongest and I markets being the weakest. And here is clearly obvious that only in the weakest markets do investor purchases make up a significant share of home sales. Second, we looked at the relationship between investor shares and a variety of neighborhood characteristics. In Philadelphia, again, we found that neighborhoods with the highest share of investor purchases were also the neighborhoods that had the highest mortgage application denial rates and the fewest homes purchased with a mortgage. Investor purchases are more common in neighborhoods with larger communities of color and in low-income neighborhoods. And so again, what PCRG found in Pittsburgh is happening nationwide in other parts of Pennsylvania, but also cities throughout the country with different housing markets and with different industrial changes over the past 20 years. To focus more concretely on the relationship between investor purchases and their impact on homeowners, we published a second report trying to examine the phenomenon of property wholesalers. Property wholesalers are the industry term for people who buy houses for cash now, the folks who put up those signs in the slides on my screen. And oftentimes wholesalers will get a contract to buy the property from a homeowner and then will resell that contract for a profit without ever actually buying the property themselves. So they act as a middleman. Now, I want to speak a little bit about the difference between formal and informal property transactions and between different types of investors, because though lots of people have seen those signs throughout our cities, they might not know what might lead to people to use those services or who those wholesalers are. So on the left-hand side, you see an idea of what a formal house sale looks like, and it's pretty standard, right? A seller retains a real estate agent who in turn lists their house for sale on the multiple listing service or MLS. The buyer or the buyer's agent finds the house, makes an offer, and terms are agreed to. Because the home is listed for sale on the MLS, the seller might find multiple offers, helping them form an opinion about what their home is worth. But the informal property transaction, which you see on the right-hand side, doesn't have such a straightforward plot. Homeowners may gift or sell their home to a family member. Owners may list the property themselves, making it for sale by owner, or FSBO. Or a wholesaler may be involved, where a homeowner agrees to sell their house to someone who is not the final buyer, nor oftentimes a real estate agent, but instead a middleman. Now, there are many reasons why homeowners may opt for an informal transaction rather than a formal one. Some homeowners may wish to work with wholesalers for speed and privacy and a guaranteed purchase price for their house. And some homeowners may find that real estate agents aren't interested in working with them or in their neighborhood because of the condition and quality of their house or what their house is worth, leaving the informal path as their only option. But we also know that wholesalers often target longtime homeowners in appreciating neighborhoods who are in times of trouble, meaning that informal transactions are often not the best outcome. The second distinction that I want to make is between different types of transactions, or different types of investors. On the left is a typology that was invented by Alan Molich following the Great Financial Crisis. Investors can be categorized by the length of time they hold a property and by the amount of money they invest. Holders and rehabbers buy a house and invest significant capital, either to hold the property for a long time as a rental or to sell it to another homeowner. Milkers, and what Molich calls flippers, but what I and most in the industry call wholesalers, invest very little money into the property. Milkers still hold the property for a long time, but allow it to deteriorate. Flippers, on the other hand, hold the property for only a very short amount of time and also invest no money. On the right-hand side, the chart shows the different types of investors who might show up in deed transactions. They might buy from a wholesaler, they might buy from a rehabber, they might buy from a homeowner, but they're all going to show up likely as an LLC. And because of the lack of transparency in business incorporations and lack of transparency in poor data quality in the property transaction market, it's difficult to disentangle between a mom and pop using an LLC and an institutional investor using an LLC. And so we don't differentiate between them in our research. I'll also note that iBuyers, who use algorithms to buy and price properties, operate similar to wholesalers, but they typically target different types of neighborhoods and different types of homes. Now, in the second report, we considered properties that were sold off the MLS to an investor to be representative of an informal property transaction that may have involved a wholesaler. As in our first report, we defined investors as corporate entities, or an entity with more than 5 transactions during our time period. Because investors may be buying fundamentally different types of homes than owner-occupants, we used regression analysis to compare the home sale prices. These two charts show the difference in home sale prices between sales on and off the MLS, all from a homeowner, but either to another homeowner or to an investor. As is plainly obvious, off MLS transactions to an investor come with significantly lower sale prices. However, because investors may be buying homes in worse conditions than homeowners, we're not really comparing apples to apples. Investors have the skills and the funding to rehabilitate homes, and so they may be willing to buy homes in poor condition and then fix them up, either to resell or rent. Thus, to try and make a more accurate comparison, we used regression analysis that took into account property conditions from the Office of Property Assessment, the results of which can be seen on the right-hand side. Here we see that homes sold to an investor from an individual off the MLS sold for approximately 50% less than some homes sold on the MLS to an individual that were of similar condition and in similar neighborhoods. Looking geographically, we can see that the share of homes sold to an investor and the share of homes sold off the MLS are not uniformly distributed throughout the city of Philadelphia. For those who know Philly, this map shows that off-MLS homes sold to an investor are more common in West and North Philadelphia. These are neighborhoods that are historically disadvantaged with large communities of color, currently experience some pretty serious gentrification threats and pressures. So what can cities do about the informal property transactions and predatory investments in the housing market? Our report lays out 3 areas for intervention. First is the importance of homeowner information. Homeowners need access to better information about the value of their home, including easy options for outside independent appraisals. Second, some homeowners turn to wholesalers in times of trouble, like when they can't afford a repair or at the beginning of a foreclosure proceedings. Thus, homeowners need better information about foreclosure diversion programs and public support for repairs so that they can remain in their homes if they wish to do so. Second, there's a need for better regulation of wholesalers. Right now, only 4 states regulate wholesalers in any way, in addition to the cities of Atlanta and Philadelphia. When wholesalers approach a homeowner, they need to disclose that they're not a real estate agent and often not acting in the homeowner's best interest. Licensing of wholesalers may be a good option in order to better understand how and where wholesalers are working and to bring the market from informal to formal. Additionally, there may be ways to change how home buying contracts are taxed to make wholesaler transactions less attractive. Finally, we need better data. Our county deed recorders are at the front lines of seeing property transactions. There needs to be better flagging for unusual transactions and for new predatory practices that may emerge. Taken together, homeowner information, wholesaler regulation, and better data tracking can ensure that homeowners are better off than they are in the current environment. With that, I'll close my presentation. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Next, we have, I think, another Zoom panelist, Megan Confer-Hammond, who's the Executive Director of our Fair Housing Partnership. Megan, are you there? There you are.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. I appreciate your kindness in letting me speak to you, as many of you have heard from me in the past. But what I want to talk on today in this context is to understand that what we're seeing with predatory home buying is not new as a form of housing discrimination. But the obligation that we have in our modern era is for our legislation to catch up with the discriminatory schemes that are impacting the most vulnerable homeowners among us. And so rather than going through data from my end, as there are many experts here with data, I want to run down the context of our history with you about how the real estate market's pursuit of profit has historically targeted the path of least resistance, which are our most vulnerable homeowners. You know, and what you've heard is that the real estate market itself is in the business of property turnover. because property turnover allows for a way to maximize profit, whether we've seen that through commissions by real estate agents, rehabbing a unit to increase a sales price or a monthly rental. However, owner-occupied homes are occupied by a homeowner who's prioritizing the stability and comfort of their home. Sometimes a homeowner may choose a remodel pursuit that maximizes the valuation of their home, and sometimes they may not, but the concept of the profit and the valuation of their home is not the priority of the homeowner or in fact the neighborhood. It is stability and the maintenance of having a home in which to base the rest of their life. And so what we're seeing with corporate residential property homeownership is it's coming into both the rental markets and the homeowner markets and impacting the housing of all types of individuals throughout the city of Pittsburgh. And so from a fair housing perspective, what I want you to understand amidst all the talking and the data that you're seeing here today is that the residential wholesalers and corporate owners are targeting the homeowners amongst the protected classes with the age-old promise of immediate cash at the expense of the loss of that home ownership, of that stability. And so we understand that the residential property deals are prioritizing immediacy, cash now, and not ensuring that the homeowner is receiving the actual value of their home. I'll give you an example is that at the Fair Housing Partnership in recent years, we received a call from a homeowner in the Hill District who was receiving unexpectedly cold calls from what we believe were corporate home buyers. And in her curiosity to understand the actual value of her home, she went on the internet and pursued Redfin and Zillow, and the amount of the value of her home that she was seeing was grossly higher, massively higher than the offers that she was being provided. And so she was asking and looking for resources to understand how to be educated on what the actual value of her home today was. And I'll tell you, in the context of city development, is that when we researched her home, we saw that her home was actually one of the developments back from around the 90s and the 2000s and the Hope 6 efforts that HUD had done at the time in building new homes in the city and in the Hill District specifically at the time. And also remember the study that was done in 2018 by Andre Perry. Andre Perry is a Brookings Institute scholar, but most importantly to us, he's also a Pittsburgher. If you look at his book, Know Your Value, you've heard me talk on that book, you will understand that the very title of his work is drawn from August Wilson's play, Two Trains Running, where the play itself is about Black homeowners in the Hill District arguing with the city of Pittsburgh at the time about what the value of their properties were during our period of eminent domain, where the city was buying and undervaluing Black-owned properties throughout the Hill District. And in that context, Andre Perry, who grew up throughout Pittsburgh and Wilkinsburg and the East Liberty area, is that he published a study in 2018 called The Devaluation of Assets in Black Neighborhoods. And what that study showed is that nationwide, that majority Black neighborhoods are valued at a lower rate than comparable majority white neighborhoods. He controlled for concepts of the valuation or the quality of the schools, of amenities such as a library or grocery stores or Target or other amenities to access. And in the city of Pittsburgh, or in the Pittsburgh metropolitan area actually, the property devaluation in majority Black neighborhoods is calculated at 11.6%. And so a property in a majority Black neighborhood in Pittsburgh will sell for almost 12% less than the exact same property in a majority white neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And so, as you've heard, all of these factors are coming into play where a corporate homeownership is targeting Black homeowners, the elderly who are disproportionately disabled, homeowners of different national origins who have limited English proficiency in engaging in contracts, and single mothers, and other protected classes who are valuing immediate cash due to emergency needs, but without receiving the critical educational resources to understand that if they decide to sell their property, that they should at the very, very minimum receive the actual value of that property. And if they don't have to sell, there are other resources available to address immediate financial needs. But what I want to put in context for you to understand about this discussion is that remember that the white flight that occurred in Pittsburgh, out of Pittsburgh, and then to our first ring suburbs, and then even further out into further suburbs, into other counties in Western Pennsylvania. That white flight that occurred in the 70s and 80s was made catastrophic by the real estate agents who were engaging in block busting. Block busting leveraged racial stereotypes to compel white homeowners to sell their homes on the perceptions that due to the civil rights era of the 60s, due to the passage of the Federal Fair Housing Act in 1968, that people of other races and national origins and identities would be moving into white neighborhoods. And real estate agents used and they stoked those racial fears in order to convince white homeowners to sell when they wouldn't otherwise have sold. And that is how white flight was made even worse, because it used racial fears in order to increase sales, because the real estate agents benefited from the sale regardless of why the sale happened. The real estate agents made increased commissions. They were they were in pursuit of this strategy in order to increase their profits without regard to what was happening in our city neighborhoods due to this practice. And so what we've seen in subsequent decades, you may be familiar with previous targeting of the elderly for reverse mortgages, which removed their home ownership, particularly upon their passing, for intergenerational wealth. And additionally, as has been referenced, predatory lending that led to the 2008 foreclosure crisis that overwhelmingly hit homeowners of color. So what I want you to understand in the Pittsburgh housing market is to understand that we already exist in a state of a massive racial disparity within our home ownership. The Pittsburgh MSA has 73% of all of our white families are homeowners. In comparison, 35% of all of our black families are homeowners. To compare that to the nationwide statistics, 44% of black families are homeowners. I cannot understate the severity of our racial homeownership in Pittsburgh. And so we are already in a state where if predatory practices such as corporate homeownership continues unfettered, we will disproportionately lose black homeowners, and we already have a difficulty with supporting homeownership by people of color. And our racial homeownership gap, which is already abysmal, will only worsen. Additionally, to bring to your attention, is that corporate ownerships, as you understand and have heard, they have the liquidity to pursue land speculation. And you understand that private funds follows public funding awards. So without protecting the city's homeowners who are most vulnerable to displacement, our new housing developments, including those that are being spurred by public awards, will disproportionately displace vulnerable homeowners based on their race, national origin, disability, and sex. And so to remember is that the pursuit by corporate owners and residential wholesalers solely based on profit, with no consideration about the welfare of the community, it's going to be done, it's being done in a way that's new. It's a strategy that hasn't necessarily been seen at scale before, but the concept of what it's doing, of targeting the most vulnerable in order to maximize profit regardless of its impact on the neighborhood, is not new to the housing market. We've seen it throughout the decade, especially after the passage of the Federal Fair Housing Act. And what I want you to know and take away is that the resulting harm is not equal. It's targeted and disproportionately impacting our city's homeowners based on who they are. And I appreciate your time today, and I'm happy to talk about any questions and provide any follow-up data.
Thank you, Executive Director. I appreciate that. And again, we've been joined by, if I had mentioned it, Councilwoman Erica Strasburger and Councilwoman Barbara Warwick. And we have one more presentation. Again, this should be around another 5 or 10 minutes. And then we will have interrogatory from members. So if make sure our speakers online stand ready. Sorry, is there something going on online? Oh, and we've been joined by Councilman Bobby Wilson online as well. I appreciate you being here. Do we have any other members online that I can't really tell unless they've got their camera on? I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me know. So our last presentation is from Dave Brangan, the Executive Director of Lawrenceville United. And as I mentioned at the opening, one of the, I think the neighborhoods where we as I mentioned, canary in a coal mine, where we saw a lot of this activity now for quite a number of years. So, Mr. Brangan.
Thank you so much to Council for having me and to Councilwoman Gross for inviting me. So I thought I'm certainly not an expert on the subject, but wanted to give some flavor of what we're seeing on the ground here in Lawrenceville and how this is materialized at the neighborhood level for a neighborhood-based organization like ours. Just quickly, for those who are not familiar, Lawrenceville United, our mission is to improve and protect the quality of life for all Lawrenceville residents. We really underscore that for all part of our mission these days. And we envision a welcoming, diverse, and empowered community that works together to ensure all residents have what they need to thrive. We are a membership-based organization, so we have about 850 Lawrenceville residents who comprise our membership, and everything really we do is to improve quality of life. I think the story of housing price appreciation and unaffordable housing in Lawrenceville is pretty well understood at this point, but just to underscore it, our median home sale price tripled between 2010 and 2020. That was the second highest housing price appreciation in America for basically that same time frame. So I really want to underscore just how quickly things changed in Lawrenceville and how much, I think to Megan's point, we're trying to play catch up now because there were not policy tools ahead of the market change in Lawrenceville. And, as others have really, I think, drawn a fine point on, displacement and racial resegregation has gone hand in hand with that housing price appreciation. Between 2010 and 2020, we lost over half of our Black population. When we look at the data of evictions in our community, this disproportionately affects single moms with school-age children. So when we think about who's most adversely being impacted by these trends, it's our kids, particularly kids from one-parent households who really stand to benefit from a neighborhood that has improving public safety, improving public schools, better public infrastructure related to mobility and transit and all those other things, green spaces. Another big portion of our work at Lawrenceville United is aging homeowners. A lot of people think of Lawrenceville and think of, millennials with beards like me, but we have a very high proportion of older adults in Lawrenceville. And, one of the interesting facts of the 2020 census is that this population is actually getting significantly older in Lawrenceville too. They're staying around and they're also aging. So we had a 40% increase in our population over 85 between 2010 and 2020. And very interestingly, this is the only demographic where the poverty rate is actually increasing in our neighborhood. And that's a function of some of we do actually have senior affordable housing in Lawrenceville, so they're actually, able to age in place. But many of these folks are also homeowners. And, a lot of people I think of like all the change that's come to Lawrenceville. But again, more than 1 in 5 homes in Lawrenceville have lived in their household since before 2000. So this is still a big, portion of our population. And Lawrenceville, Pittsburgh overall has a very old housing stock, and Lawrenceville has one of the oldest housing stocks within that city. 70% of our housing stock was built before 1940 compared to just 50% citywide. And we're on the National Registry of Historic Places, so this is a real asset too, but it's in danger. So, within this context, we see a lot of our low-income homeowners, especially older adults, are left very vulnerable. And alongside of that, just to underscore PCRG's great report and what it looks like at a neighborhood like ours, we've seen tons of investor activity in Lawrenceville. So nearly 800 sales to corporate entities and investors just between 2010 and 2021 across our 3 city neighborhoods. That's 27% of total sales in upper and lower Lawrenceville. And, I think the other previous speakers have spoken to how these corporate sales are paying pennies on the dollar. People often think of our homeowners in in the second most high housing price appreciated zip code in America as the winners in that whole equation, but they're getting fleeced for a lot of the equity in their homes. And it's particularly true in Lawrenceville, where our homeowners selling to investors are earning 54% of the average home sale price compared to 70% citywide, which is already bad. And within this, we've seen some really, gross predatory practices. To put some finer point on that and give you some specific examples of actual cases that have come across our desk, we were supporting a low-income, lifelong Lawrenceville resident homeowner who had inherited his parents' house. The property had deferred maintenance. He reached out to us because he got a property code violation. Long story short, we were able to track, this actually was done by the adjacent, a developer down the street who was flipping houses, had knocked on the door, asked to see this person's house, and tour the property with him because he wanted to avoid any potential impacts of the construction he was doing to their foundation. Used this to walk around the house, take note of all the flaking paint, and other property code violations. 311'd it, waited for him to get that property code violation, and then, which threatens to fine you for every day that the violation goes unaddressed, and then followed up on a really lowball cash offer on the house. So pretty sophisticated, but obviously very gross activity. And for, an unsuspecting homeowner who inherited this from their, they don't know that there are resources out there in all cases that, you can work with our inspectors, we can, develop a plan, we can apply for home repairs, all of these things. A lot of people, they get that letter from the city and it really feels existential to them. And we have seen, unfortunately, examples where people get duped out of, significant equity in their houses by this strategy. Another example, we had a resident reach out to us whose grandmother lived on Main Street, which is, the central corridor, residential corridor of Lawrenceville, and among our most expensive houses. Their grandmother, they discovered that someone was just doing door knocking on Main Street. Their grandmother has dementia, and basically was just subjected to some very aggressive sales tactics by a door knocker who got her under agreement on a house, actually got him signed agreement for pennies on, under $100,000 for a very good condition home on Main Street, which is easily worth 3 times the amount that they got on the sales agreement for, I think, $100 cash down. But took advantage of her confusion in that moment, basically said, this is the best offer you're ever going to get if you don't, sign this agreement right now. So 2 anecdotal examples, but goes to show you, I think, again, to Megan's point around the profitability that you can have here, and some very vulnerable homeowners. These investors and flippers are sometimes really taking advantage and coming up with really grossly sophisticated methods to strip people of their equity. And this has contributed to real loss of some of our longtime homeowners. We saw 31% loss of homeowners who lived in Lawrenceville for over 35 years in just 3 years. And this was reported on by CityLab through Bloomberg a few years ago, specifically looking at how flippers in Pittsburgh were using these new tactics. I also wanted to just note too, while we're talking about corporate ownership of properties, the also trend of short-term rentals, which is also an issue that we deal with in Lawrenceville. Right now, this is a relatively low proportion of our overall housing stock, but Lawrenceville has seen a lot of short-term rentals where we're seeing a big trend is of corporate entities scooping up previously rental property and then converting it into Airbnbs or other kinds of short-term rentals, which is further squeezing the market and the supply of rental housing, which only exacerbates some of our affordability issues. And I think, as we have all seen, can contribute to some other issues related to public safety and other things. There's been some research done, for example, in New York, that's shown that a doubling of Airbnb locations has led to a rise in property values of 6 to 11%. So these things are kind of exacerbating each other. This is just a map, and you can see, again, while it's a relatively low proportion right now in Lawrenceville, you can see there's like certain blocks, especially in central Lawrenceville, where there's big concentrations of these short-term rentals, which again just really squeezes the market and exacerbates our affordability crisis. This is obviously a citywide challenge. We were part of the recent housing needs assessment that was completed by the city, and I know that council got briefed on a few weeks ago. We were part of the working group on that. Just to, again, put a fine point on it, Pittsburgh lost 950 black homeowners earning under $75,000 per year between 2015 and 2019. That's a greater proportional loss of black homeowners than black renters during the same time. In addition to black homeowners being disproportionately cost burdened and therefore more vulnerable, older homeowners are also disproportionately cost burdened too, who are often living on Social Security and trying to, navigate really tight budgets. I did want to just call attention to a recommendation that came out of the housing needs assessment that I think, kind of piggybacks off of those statistics. That to support homeownership, Pittsburgh needs to stabilize and protect existing owners while also expanding the access to homeownership to a wider number of residents. So I'll just speak a little bit about what are we doing at LU that might be some lessons learned for other communities or other groups or for council. One of the big ways that we stay really in touch with the population that's most targeted by these trends is we call it the Advantage Program, which is a free membership program specifically for those older adults in our neighborhood. We have 300 members, and we have all kinds of programs and regular education and workshops and kind of socializing that we do with them. It's also a great way for us to kind of have age-friendly targeting of communications. So issues that are particularly relevant to this group, like whole home repairs opening or the homeowner assistance program or other kinds of programs that are out there, or even just educating folks about these trends. We do tailored mailings to this group. We do regular robo-dials, and we have a very strong relationship specifically with this group that allows us to intervene when things do go wrong. We also do a lot of education. The professor at Drexel spoke about this, really trying to educate people about the value of their home. Some of these more predatory practices, what do you do when you get a violation from the notice? And we try to do some fun crowdsourcing of removal of We Buy Houses signs around the neighborhood by offering $1. It's a standing offer. Anyone can bring us a We Buy Houses signs, and if we have $1 on us, we'll give it to you. But do it for the fun of bringing those signs down. Another big part of our work is just resource navigation. So helping people to actually, when they do face a crisis, to be able to access home repairs so they can get out of code violations, doing accessibility modifications. Many of our older adults, they don't want to cash out on their home. They just want to age in place as they get older. Accessibility modifications are a huge part of that. Tangled title assistance and wills and estate planning are huge. These are some services that have been funded by the Housing Opportunity Fund and other very, very important and also a very low cost way to get ahead of these issues before they get to the land bank, which is very expensive. We're putting a lot of public money into fixing these issues down the road, when sometimes just a simple tangled title assistance or just getting a will in place for folks can help avoid that 10, 20 years from now. Mortgage assistance, and we also do a localized emergency grant program, which we call the Neighbors in Need program. We've also started keeping up with the sophistication of some of our more predatory actors in the neighborhood by doing tailored monitoring and outreach, where we're actually monitoring all evictions in the neighborhood, doing individualized outreach to every eviction in Lawrenceville. But now we're also looking at code violations, looking at, okay, is this a low-income homeowner? Is it a homestead exemption? Kind of analyzing it against property assessment data to parse between code violations of, people who are just speculating and sitting on property and really do deserve a violation versus maybe somebody who's living on Social Security who can't afford to fix a pretty minor issue on their property. And we also started monitoring with the help of the Create Lab, mortgage foreclosures, which this is another place that these predatory practices step in. They'll monitor the filings, the mortgage filings, and try to step in to offer cash, often way undervalued for homes. So if we can get to them first to offer mortgage assistance and all this resource navigation, maybe we can protect that a little bit more. I wanted to highlight a success story that we've had here in Lawrenceville, where we had a long-time Black homeowner in the neighborhood who lost income due to having a stroke, and also due to her job and how it was affected by COVID. Basically, long story short, we provided a number of different resources, but it eventually led to foreclosure proceedings. And these are the properties that are then going to corporate sales, right? A lot of our longtime homeowners, as these are turning over, are the ones that are getting scooped up, flipped, and sold for really high prices. We were able to step in, and through our partners with the Community Land Trust, the CLT was able to actually purchase the land under her home for the balance on her mortgage. She doesn't have any heirs, so her goal was to preserve her equity in the home. And now she's leaving a home that will always be affordable to the community, even after she passes away. This will go on to supporting more homeowners like her and the next generation. But she owns her home outright. She's preserved $130,000 of equity in the home as opposed to being foreclosed on, and she gets to stay in the neighborhood. So really great success story in doing both of those things that I think were called out in the housing needs assessment of supporting existing homeowners, but also providing opportunities for future homeowners too, and permanently keeping a property away from the worst aspects of the private market. And I also just wanted to call attention to we are part of a coalition of dozens of organizations that belong to the Housing Justice Table, and increasingly we've done a lot of work kind of articulating some of our vision for housing justice in Pittsburgh. Housing is a human right that cannot be left solely to markets. It's kind of front and center for a new vision statement that we collectively crafted over the last couple months. And increasingly, I think we are really trying to push this idea of social housing, where governments, we're not just regulating the private market, but actually, having the public sector take more responsibility for the provision of housing, especially affordable housing, which has not been a great trend in the United States, but is increasing, has been very popular and very effective in other countries, and increasingly is being used in other places right here in the United States to actually develop the capacity of the public sector to insulate housing from the worst woes of the private market, from commodification and from the profit incentive, but instead to make it about being a human right and being about supporting communities, as so many others said. So this can include investing in things like cooperative housing and community land trust, but also, really investing in public housing, not just public housing. When we say public housing in America, we often think of that as extremely low-income housing, but social housing is really providing housing for everybody, and creating systems where it doesn't depend on constant subsidy by the public sector in order to, address the disparity between the rents that you're receiving and the upkeep that's required of housing. So there are places like Montgomery County, Maryland right now that are actually starting to develop the muscle to this. I think this is really relevant to council right now, especially as the affordable housing bond gets developed. But what they're doing in Montgomery County is they actually passed a $100 million revolving fund that allows their, they call it the Housing Opportunity Commission, which is basically like their housing finance agency and their housing authority in one. They can go invest directly into projects, and then they use their ownership position instead to maximize profit. They're using it to subsidize rents for low-income renters. And it's a revolving fund, so they can, they're charging interest with private developers who are actually constructing these projects, the funds come back to the public and they can go in and get in other deals too. When you start to think 20, 30 years from now, we'll actually have some really significant, they'll actually be able to scale this at a really significant scale. So that's how I think one way we can start to build an alternative system to the privatized housing market that we're currently trying to grapple with and regulate. Building an alternative, I think, is ultimately the real way we get out of these challenges. And I'll conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director Brangen. I am really glad to hear those on-the-ground cases. It really helps us put together the data and the living reality of it, so I appreciate that. I'm going to open up the floor to members, and just a reminder, we have in front of us, I think we got the hard copies of the presentations in front of you. You also have a copy of the legislation. Our panelists here weren't prepared to speak line by line to the legislation. I told everybody, Council will talk about the legislation when it's back on our agenda. This is a post-agenda, so we're talking about the broader context, both nationally, about the dynamics in the industry and the implications here in the city. So Councilman Coghill was first in the room,
Okay.
so Councilman.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gross. And I will say I took most of my notes on the legislation, so I'm going to be briefer than what I typically am. The Councilwoman informed me halfway through that we're going to discuss that next week, which is fine. But first and foremost, thank you. You know, we all know she is the foremost expert in affordable, unaffordable, transitional. If it's housing, she's on it. So, you know, I appreciate all the work you've done in the field throughout your career here, at least, and probably before that. So, I just want to touch on a few things. I live in Beachview, familiar? Okay. You know, used to be just Lawrenceville, just, you know, south side, I guess, and other areas, but it's coming to me now, I will tell you. And makes it incredibly hard when I get a real legitimate 311 call, whether it's the weeds or, you know, windows broken, you name it, to track these folks down. I mean, they were all over the world. That's how I discovered it's come to my town. Okay, over numerous phone calls as to really 311 calls, we can't find them, and we search and we cite the person's name on the deed, I guess. I don't think they give a damn, no matter where they live. You know, it just goes unattended to. 85 homes from one in particular person owns 85 homes in Beachview. Beachview is like 8,000 people. It's probably, I don't know what it is compared to Lawrenceville, but we don't have that many homes. So, as you were talking, of course, you know, this directly affects affordable housing, right? I know these corporations, they purchase these homes sight unseen. They don't care, you know, get them a decent price. Real estate's probably one of the most steady, firm investments you can make. You're never going to lose your value, even if the place falls down. The land, it's always going to be, you know, always going to hold its value. So it is an interest to me now, because it's in my neighborhood. It's not that I didn't care before, but you know, I'm seeing it firsthand. Let me ask you this: do other cities practice what Councilwoman Gross is putting forward? Is there examples?
We also have the professor who studied in the national trends.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, and feel free to jump in, Professor, if you're the most adequate to answer the question, please. But yeah, I guess my first question is: are there examples around the country of such practices?
Sure, I can maybe step that. At least my understanding of the two ordinances that are on the post agenda today, around wholesaler licensure and non-harassment of homeowners, have both been put in place by the city of Philadelphia and the city of Atlanta. Wholesalers are pretty unregulated nationwide. Illinois, Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma are the only states that have any sort of regulations, but there's been a lot of interest recently over how to help make sure that homeowners don't get harassed and that they're also paying the best offer that they can get if they do choose to sell.
Right. So it has been used.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Dave, I wanted to say a couple of things that spoke to me when you were speaking. You know, I love your idea of targeting the vulnerable population before they can target the vulnerable population. appreciation. Fantastic. And I want to speak to one thing in particular, the person that you were referring to who had received first of all, pretty slick of that guy, right? Report this person to 311. Put the pressure on this person, let them know. And I will tell you this, our verbiage in our PLI citations, I would like to see it changed because it scares the wits out of people. When you see you can be fined up to $1,000 a day, I think I don't know what it is in the real estate, but, certain other things I know, people panic, right? I mean, then they think they're going to lose their house. So I think internally we should address that and not try to scare people to doing whatever they have to do. I think that's what people run and they look for a buyer because they don't want to be fined $1,000 a day for the rest of their life. So I never did like that. I addressed it with our law department and PLI, and they tell me, oh, they have to have it in there for whatever reasons. I don't believe we have to have it in there. I really don't. It's just makes people do desperate things, and I've seen it firsthand. And you described the situation to be there. So, but I love the idea of targeting the vulnerable before they can, okay? And letting them know, hey, if somebody comes calling, call us, basically. There's help, whether it's our housing fund or, there's a number of ways you can help them, and at least put their mind at ease saying, we're not going to let them take your house, So that really, count on me to get behind any efforts that you put behind that. I really love that idea. And let's face it, they sell out of desperation, right? Most people, when they have an offer, they're going to get paid tomorrow. They don't have to go through the efforts of hiring a real estate agent, listing the property. It's like sign here and see you later. And clearly, that's why we have these corporations, paying 70% of the market value versus 100%. Am I right in that? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What about the realtors? I know they have a very strong lobbying effort, as to fighting anything. I don't know if the realtors would. They support? Okay, yeah. So that was my question, I guess. I didn't know if they would be objective to this. Well, yeah, they sell it at a higher market rate if we keep it in-house here, right? So, okay, that's really good to know because I've seen their legal battles in front of this table before, and, they have money to pay expensive lawyers to, combat ours. So,
And I believe
yeah, Chris, please.
there's probably repercussions if a realtor, does something predatory. So I think there's professional guidelines that they have to follow. So
It's very regulated.
Yeah,
yes,
regulated. It's
compared
above
to
board.
A lot of the wholesaling.
I mean, the realtors have their own guidelines, or
Yeah,
are you
and
referring to
standards,
our
yeah.
legislation?
The realtors.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
not that
yeah.
I'm going to speak on
Yeah,
behalf, but
I know I got ahead of myself, but I did notice in our legislation there was, securities from that happening. But we'll talk about that next week. So, what a percentage when corporations buy this? I'll tell you, in my neighborhood, they sit there. They don't care. They'll rent them, I guess, but for the most part, they just buy them. They just know they're going to be worth something someday. It's their portfolio. They have this much money. They just accumulate properties. And again, if you're in it for the long haul, especially, you're making good money without doing a damn thing. And that's what bothers me about corporations buying properties, and besides taking advantage of our most vulnerable. Do we have any idea percentage? Like with these corporate buyers, do they hold on to them? Do they flip them? What's their end game here? Do we know?
yeah, I mean, a lot of it is anecdotal, what we're hearing from folks on the ground. Stepping back, part of the reason why we at PCRG wanted to do this study and report is to give our neighborhoods a tool to look at these corporations in their own neighborhoods. So you could go on to our study right now and go into and look at Beachview and find out all of the LLCs that are, own properties. We wanted to give that tool out to our neighborhoods.
And Chris, I'm sorry, did you say you already have that tool?
Yes.
Oh, is that
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can pull out all those entities. For the most part, I mean, it's not perfect. We tried to pull out all the nonprofit partnerships, maybe that have, neighborhood associations have partnered with a private developer to do a project. We tried to exclude those from the report. But yeah, the speculations throughout the city. I mean, and county, quite frankly. So they just
That's a good tool.
yeah, it's really
We could
nice
give
tool.
it to our PLI so they could track the people down and cite and fine them. But
Well, you bring up a good point. Our second phase of this is going to track violations on code violations. So that's phase 2. Yeah.
Well, when Councilwoman, we talked about this briefly a couple weeks ago, I told her, I said, you're really onto something here. I said, this is how we can, first of all, fight, we fight the lack of affordable housing, right? I mean, it really is a great tool for that. Most of all, protecting our most vulnerable. So yeah, I'll be interested to go over the legislation next week and, iron out the details there. But thanks for the work you do. It's all good stuff. And that's it for me, Councilwoman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I'll go to Councilwoman Warwick next, and then I'll look to see if members are online, and we'll go to members online after that.
Yeah, hey everyone, thanks for being here. I don't know if I have too many questions. I mean, I'm familiar with all this and obviously the issues that are raised. I mean, I guess I'm curious from your perspective. I mean, I know we're not like discussing the legislation, but just a quick sort of the do not solicit list, a residential wholesaler's license, and then like a disclosure to the buyer. That's sort of the summary. Is there anything, and I sort of have, as I've been thinking, and just sort of in ways, things that we might be able to do with PLI, but do you all have any thoughts on ways that we could, and I have questions about the legislation, but we can talk about that at another time. But do you all have any thought? I mean, have things come up of like, oh, the city should do X to, protect homeowners from these types of predatory buyers that maybe isn't here, or just thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I would just go back to, I think regulating these practices to the extent that the city can is very important. And, I think what we often see with things like this, though, is if they are not, like, how is it going to be enforced, right? And that's always a challenge, I think, with all the cities. So I guess that would just be a question, or maybe an offer of like, how are we enforcing this? But I think all of the legislation is great. I think more regulation is certainly needed. Having, a wait period, disclosures, a do not solicit list. I mean, I can't tell you how many people in Lawrenceville are just flooded with postcards and text messages and phone calls, like with these cash offers on their houses. It's wild. But I guess I just would just return to, like, I think, in addition to regulating, these corporate practices, I think as much as we can be investing in supporting our existing homeowners, particularly Black and low-income homeowners who are very vulnerable to losing their homes, and we see that again in the data, to the extent that we can both be supporting that while also, building up permanent affordable housing, so that we're not continually playing this game every generation. I mean, that's one of the struggles we have with affordable housing, is that the affordability periods often go away after a very short period of time. And that's kind of the, why I think we at the Housing Justice Table have really been trying to center and really strongly push for permanent affordability, but also, retaining public ownership as much as possible. So cooperative housing, community land trust homes, these are going to be permanently affordable. That home that I talked about, where we got that woman out of foreclosure, that's not just for her and for the next home. That's going to be an affordable home forever, always in Lawrenceville. And that's how we can really start to develop our, to stabilize an entire community, and make sure that we have a mixed income community, into the long term. So I guess those would be, the other, in addition to a regulation, which I think it is really important. So I really want to commend Councilman Gross for doing this. But in addition, I think we need to be investing in, what are the tools that homeowners need to preserve home ownership there, but also be investing in permanent and social housing.
I think if I may follow up to David, I would agree that I think enforcement is a really important piece here, and making sure probably that there's some collaboration with the county government, since they're ultimately the ones recording the deeds and recording the transfers, to make sure that when homes are sold via a wholesaler, there's some ability to track whether or not the wholesaler was licensed with the city of Pittsburgh, and whatever level of disciplinary action is necessary if the wholesaler isn't licensed, whether that transaction can go through or not, whether that transaction is valid or not, to make sure that homeowners who end up selling with a wholesaler who isn't regulated don't end up in the same position that they would be without the regulation. And so I think that's tricky in the case of Pittsburgh in a way that maybe wasn't tricky in Philadelphia, where city and county government are one and the same, that I think would be important in the implementation phase. But I'm also not a lawyer, so I'll caveat that.
To piggyback on this discussion is part of what makes this pursuit powerful is its enforceability by the existence of the city's Commission on Human Relations. And the city's CHR is the only CHR within the entire state and Commonwealth that is substantially equivalent to HUD and federal fair housing law. And so as a non-discriminatory ordinance is that it's the city's hopeful support of CHR and then leveraging its access to federal funds and federal contracts is to make sure that such legislation or actions would actually be enforceable to the points being made, because the first half of any legislation is simply passing it, but having it actually occur on the ground and the communications happening as needed across the different departments and making sure that there is a way to prevent this from happening as opposed to being reactive is where there's particular power in this effort. I would also raise to the consideration of Council's ongoing discussions is concepts of how appraisals are done and the discrimination that happens and the devaluation that happens in the appraisal industry that is ongoing nationwide now to find ways to address it, and how different city funds and city initiatives consider the valuation of properties. And one of the big conversations that will be ongoing is certainly in the land bank. And so the idea of making sure that when properties are being bought or sold or valued, that we're understanding that the valuation happening is correct.
Yeah, so, okay, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking, I mean, I kind of agree. When we talk about enforcement, I'm always about, right, enforcement is tricky, right? Do not solicit list is great, but how do you, enforcing all these things. I'm also just trying to think, too, in terms of ways to get information. I mean, like, we're talking about, for example, the PLI letters, right? If we could include in every PLI letter that has, related to fines having to do with whatever, gutters falling off, things that would be expensive, or even not, even just cutting your grass or whatever it is. In big type, a telephone number that you can call if you are, if you don't have the funds to do this, or you need assistance with paying for this, call this number, and then that number, whoever that was, could connect with the resources. Another one would be, in addition to sending the PLI letters to the homeowner or whoever is listed as the homeowner, also send the letters to the house itself, so that the renter, so if it's a renter, they get it and they can see, but that would maybe include info about the rental registry or something like that that could be beneficial to the renter to get those things fixed, et cetera. And then the last thing, I'm thinking that the city could do this. I mean, it would be nice if the county did it, since they do the property value assessments, but whatever, we could do it too. Is just to send regular, a yearly, or, every year, every couple of years, just a very simple letter that says, this is what your property is worth. Send it to the house, and send it to the address, rather than that way, if the renter gets that, not a big deal, but just so that if there is that homeowner who is the elderly person who doesn't have email and doesn't, and doesn't know about a QR code, just like here, this is the information that we have on your house, FYI. Yeah, it's tricky. It's a tricky situation. And I know too, just to kind of, is that in Pittsburgh, which is kind of something new that I learned when I got here, is there are a lot of housing sales that happen in Pittsburgh that don't happen with realtors. There's lots, and it's not even like illicit stuff. It's like, I live in a neighborhood, I sell a house to my friend, right? I just sell it to my friend. Like, why would I bother with a realtor? And, I would hesitate, I worry about, I don't know how large that network is, but, is that a residential wholesaler? I don't know, so anyway, just kind of thinking of all the issues that might come up. Anyway, yeah, thanks for being here. It's a tricky situation, but I'm glad we're talking about it. Thank you, Councilwoman. I'm glad we're talking about it.
Could I just say that?
Absolutely.
I was going to say that PLI, and we raised the same issue of there needs to be resources that's going to the homeowner at the same time that they're receiving those violations. And so I will say that PLI now includes the Housing Opportunity Fund, as an attachment to every single violation notice that they send out, which is great. There is still the threat of the fine, which I've had that same back and forth that you were talking about, Councilman. And I get it, that you do want to do. I think we differentiate between someone who's speculating and just letting the grass grow forever, but has the resources to do it, versus someone who's living on Social Security who is doing it because they don't have the means to do it. And I just maybe would say that I think that speaks to the value of community organizations that do have really strong relationships in neighborhoods, because while it's hard for I think a city entity to be making those kinds of distinctions and understanding differences in need, I think that's oftentimes the benefit of neighborhood-based organizations, is you do have really strong roots and relationships and can get to the bottom of those kinds of things. And that's another, aspect that I think council actually has, the power of the purse to actually finance. And, the Neighborhood Economic Development Program, NED, has, it's kind of stayed, that funding has stayed pretty the same for a very long period of time, or decreased. So, that's just another place. Obviously, I have a selfish interest here, but
That's at the budget hearing in a couple weeks.
That's right. Yeah.
But
that's oftentimes that concept that I was just sharing about pairing support for a homeowner with an acquisition for a community land trust. Those are that's the place where we're often working out those kinds of solutions so that we can scale them to other neighborhoods.
I don't think I have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. I do want to just emphasize a few things. I think thank you to all of our speakers who did a great job. Again, we're kind of framing what is the context, and I asked all of the speakers to speak to kind of describing to us both the kind of national actors and that how other cities are experiencing and dealing with this, but also kind of what is the threat in Pittsburgh. And I really think it is a threat. It is a risk to our neighborhoods that we have not only these bad actors committing basically discriminatory housing practices on our vulnerable citizens and basically stealing the wealth and equity in their homes, but that the outcomes, the impacts on our neighborhoods is to decrease the availability of housing. as we heard, some of these buyers are not selling to anyone. They're not even renting to anyone. So they're literally just taking housing off the market. Some of them just letting it rot in place. Others are buying them and using them for short-term rental. So again, there's no neighbors there, and there's definitely not a homeownership potential there. And then others are, maybe they are flipping and selling the house, but they've maybe eliminated for affordable apartments. Because again, our housing stock, a lot of those apartments in the city of Pittsburgh, being a historic city, are in single-family homes that were, 100 years ago built to be a single-family home, but are currently for affordable apartments. And then so we're losing those renters as neighbors, and it's being flipped into one single house that maybe has homeowners in it, maybe does not. So we have set aside as a city council a substantial amount of money for new home construction, for home ownership programs, for mortgage assistance programs. It's really, I think we have rightfully identified trying to not have a decrease in home ownership, and so we're trying to increase it with dollars and with staffing and partnership with URA, but with this external threat, we're losing it at the same time. So we're definitely not gaining ground, and it feels that we're losing ground, and we're especially losing ground under certain parts of the city in low-income neighborhoods and in certain populations. So I think we really see that in these presentations. I think that's incredibly valuable. I also want to say that it's always iterative. This is not everything. So we have the legislation that we'll be discussing in session when we get the people at the table who can talk, the city departments who can respond and talk line by line, is only about that predatory, discriminatory home buying practice that are the wholesaler operators. But that is only a subset of this larger challenge of the corporate ownership and takeover of housing. And we've seen some really good suggestions that we haven't gotten to yet. And so I really want to thank always the leadership in Lawrenceville and Dave especially to be doing this kind of outreach, monitoring evictions on your own. We, I think, can and should be doing this at the city. We're starting to fund it a little bit with housing opportunity funds so that some of the magistrates' courts are getting monitored so that we can find the people who are at risk of eviction and give them legal support. Or connect the homeowners who are facing violations, I think is something we can do a lot better on so that we can get them that support. That was a great suggestion. And again, we're grateful to the community organizations who have been pioneering this, basically piloting it. And mortgage foreclosures was something in the last housing crisis, was 2008, that we were fortunate to have less of an impact in Pittsburgh than other cities, but we're seeing it now. So again, Lawrenceville at the forefront of kind of identifying the problem, and a shout out to Create Lab at CMU, who's been really helpful in doing all of the monitoring from lead poisoning in children to eviction crisis and now the mortgage foreclosure crisis. So I really appreciate that. Do we have any last questions? We don't have anyone left online.
Just real quickly, I really liked Councilwoman Warwick's idea is to send a notification like this is what your house is worth. As long as they don't have to pay the taxes on that price that we give them, because the assessed value, as we know, is, at least in today, is much, much less. But, they may see their assessed value at $200,000, but we know in the heart of Lawrenceville that will sell for $500,000 tomorrow. So maybe coming from a neighborhood group like yourself, without getting caught up in any legalities of it, you could tell them, here's the deal. Don't think that this place is just worth 200. Don't take any less than 500 or, anyway. And the last thing was I wanted to mention, David, again, the payback for the signs, picking up the signs. I like that idea too. What if I bring you a billboard? What's that worth?
Yeah, I don't know. We might not have room for it in our office, but we'll take it. We'll figure it out.
I'll have people out there hustling if that's the case. And where do they come? To you for the money?
That's right.
All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you,
Councilwoman.
Appreciate that. I don't think we have any other questions or business. If we have any final comments from our presenters, thank you all for the work that you do every day, and thank you for being with us here to educate us on this important topic. I'm going to call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.